Arthur was remembered by people locally right up until the 1940s. There were letters written into the Sheffield newspapers. Is it the Sheffield Telegraph and Independent? Anyway, there's a Sheffield newspaper that often ran articles about sportsmen from previous periods, and a letter writer wrote in and said, my father, 50 years ago, my father told me about Arthur Wharton, you know, and then he recounts some of the things that Arthur used to do. So locally, I think there were people that remembered Arthur, and the problem was Arthur was forgotten nationally, and I'll go into the reasons why. But his legacy, I think the greatest, his legacy, because it wasn't recognised at the time, didn't get a place, its deserved place in the historical kind of accounts of athletics and football of the period. What I mean by that is Arthur was seen as an eccentric goalkeeper that sometimes messed around when he played in goal, and I believe that he had a goalkeeping style that he adapted to the conditions of the time. So rather than messing around, he was actually quite a unique goalkeeper. He was the first one that we know of to wear kind of arm guards. You know, and I talked about he used to crouch in the corner of his goal, he used to hang onto the crossbar. He didn't do this to mess around and be a showman. He did it as part of his goalkeeping technique. The problem was it wasn't recognised as that at the time. So some of the things that he did, his uniqueness, was not recognised. Therefore, you know, it was very easily forgotten because it wasn't seen as serious or worthy. So there's that whole thing about his a kind of avant-garde nature to him. You know, he was ahead of his time in many ways. There's also his colour, that, you know, he contradicted a lot of the preconceived notions of what Africans were, what they were about, their intelligence, their place in the history of the human species. And he contradicted a lot of those stereotyped, racist kind of images of the African as being uncivilized, lower down the evolutionary scale, nearer to the animal, etc., etc. He also played for working class teams and lived in the north. So he wasn't part of the southern elite upper middle class establishment, although he had all the credentials to become part of that establishment. He preferred to live in the north. He played for working class teams in the north. They don't tend to get their histories written and published. And in the biography of Arthur, I compared him to another man of colour who was, as a sporting celebrity, was his equal at the time in cricket. It was a man called Ranjit Singh, who was an Indian prince. Now Ranjit Singh is still a name in cricket now. You know, people, anyone who follows cricket will have heard of Ranjit Singh. And he had a fantastic cricketing career, but you know, Arthur had a fantastic football and sporting career, and you could see their lives as kind of parallel. It occurred in a similar time. They were contemporaries of each other. Ranjit Singh gets remembered, has his place in the pantheon of cricket history. Wharton's forgotten, you know. So you have to look. It's not just about colour; it's also class. About Wharton being or becoming predominantly working class, and Ranjit Singh being upper middle class, or part of the aristocracy really, and playing his sport down in the south. So I think that they're the reasons that primary reasons I'd identify as to why Arthur was forgotten really. Jackie Robinson and Joe Louis, at the time they were playing and boxing and playing baseball, were weren't revered by American society. Jackie Robinson had to fight to become equal in baseball, and they had a separate league for what they call coloured players then. And Joe Louis was not universally respected throughout America because of the racism of American society at that time. So they had almost their place in history now as an inverse relationship to their place in American society when they were living. They weren't revered universally. They were subject to a lot of racism, and it's almost like it's a way of society expunging its guilt by elevating them now. It's a bit like Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, when he burnt his draft card and he said those famous words, "Why should I go to Vietnam? No Viet Cong's called me a nigger," But now, look, recently in the last week or so, we've had program after program about what a fantastic man Ali was. Now, I've always thought he was my boyhood hero, Ali, Pele, Bobby Moore, coloured. But at the time, he was nearly sent to prison, Ali. And when after he won the Olympic medal in Rome in '62, Ali went to get served in his hometown of Louisville, wearing his medal, Olympic medal, and it was refused a hamburger. He said, so what was the medal worth? It was worth nothing, So I think you've got a different situation with American society, which was more overtly racist, they had slavery for longer, to British society, which, according to black people of the time, was less racist than America. So I think there's less inclination here to actually apologise for the past as there is in America. I think that's one of the reasons that we've got this mistaken idea that things were never as bad in Britain for black people, therefore we don't have to we haven't got this historical debt that we have to repay. I would dispute that. I think it's a matter of degree. I think Britain was a racist society. There was very progressive people in Britain at that time, progressive elements. You had communist candidates standing elections on anti-racist platforms, on anti-discrimination platforms, on things we'd see as normal today. So I think there's that reason why there's a difference between the place that maybe black sportsmen from previous decades, the place they have in American society, elevated place they have now, compared to our black sportsmen and the not so elevated place many of them have.
Why, if people sat down and kind of even very, very knowledgeable football fans sat down and listed kind of key black players through history, I think you might be hard pushed. Everyone would pretty much get Viv Anderson. Some people might get Albert Johansson. Why doesn't it go back further than that, really, even amongst kind of very knowledgeable football fans?
It will, Matt, after this documentary.
But I mean, why doesn't it stretch back? Is it because that history is kind of almost close enough to touch?
Yeah, and I think, you touched on it, it's forgotten. If you look at encyclopedias of football, I mean, there's an encyclopedia of football by a man called Maurice Goldsworthy, who in all other respects was very knowledgeable and produced some great encyclopedias on football in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. But when it came to players of colour, it was useless. He got facts wrong, he missed out key players like Wharton. And it would be very difficult to miss Wharton, because if you looked at football annuals of the 1890s, Wharton's in there as one of the, there's a famous football annual of stars of the 1890s, and there's a photograph of Wharton in there, so you'd only have to look and you'd find in that respect, but so you've got to say maybe it's just more than, a lack of knowledge. There's other factors involved that, the idea that Britain, up until recently, liked to think of itself that it had a monochrome past. That we didn't have black people in Britain until the Empire Windrush, and that you know, that we were a fairer society than we really were, you know. So I think there's a number of reasons, but it's class and colour are the two primary reasons why black working class athletes and footballers get forgotten. As I said, I mentioned, you know, Ranjit Singh has been remembered because he was an Indian prince. He played cricket in the south. He became a key figure in Indian society when he stopped playing cricket. So, you know, these people write their own histories. Working class people, working class black people don't write their own histories.